At the turn of the 20th century, Europe was at the height of its power. Industrialization fueled immense economic growth, vast colonial empires stretched across the globe, and nations competed for military and cultural dominance. Yet beneath this surface of prosperity lay deep-rooted rivalries. The major powers were bound together in a fragile system of alliances. On one side stood the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. On the other, the Triple Entente: Britain, France, and Russia. These alliances were meant to guarantee security, but in reality they created a dangerous web in which a conflict between two nations could drag in many others. Militarism further heightened tensions. Germany and Britain were locked in a naval arms race, building dreadnought battleships that symbolized power and prestige. France sought revenge for its humiliating defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–71, in which Germany had taken the province of Alsace-Lorraine. Meanwhile, Russia and Austria-Hungary clashed over influence in the Balkans, where rising nationalism threatened to fracture old empires. The Balkans became known as the powder keg of Europe. Serbia, a small but ambitious Slavic kingdom, aspired to unite all South Slavs under its leadership. Austria-Hungary, a multi-ethnic empire struggling to contain its restless minorities, viewed Serbian nationalism as a direct threat. Then came the event that would ignite the fuse. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, visited Sarajevo. There he and his wife Sophie were assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a member of the nationalist group known as the Black Hand. The assassination shocked the world. Austria-Hungary, emboldened by Germany's promise of support, the so-called blank check, issued a harsh ultimatum to Serbia. Serbia accepted most of the demands but rejected others that infringed on its sovereignty. On July 28, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Within a week, Europe descended into chaos. Russia mobilized to defend Serbia. Germany declared war on Russia, and soon after on France. To execute its war strategy, the Schlieffen Plan, Germany invaded Belgium to quickly defeat France before turning to Russia. Britain, honoring its pledge to protect Belgian neutrality, declared war on Germany on August 4, 1914. What began as a regional crisis had exploded into a continental war. Soldiers from every corner of Europe marched off, many believing it would be over by Christmas. Instead, the world was entering a conflict that would last more than 4 years, reshape entire societies, and claim millions of lives. By the end of 1914, the war had settled into a grim stalemate. On the Western Front, from the North Sea to the Swiss Alps, trenches stretched for hundreds of miles. What was meant to be a war of movement became a war of mud, barbed wire, and attrition. By early 1915, the conflict had expanded into a global war. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, drawing the Middle East into the struggle. Italy, breaking from the Triple Alliance, entered on the side of the Allies in 1915, lured by promises of territorial rewards. The Western Front descended into a nightmare of trench warfare. Life in the trenches was harsh and unforgiving. Soldiers lived surrounded by mud, lice, rats, and the constant threat of artillery shells. The introduction of poison gas added a new layer of horror. First used by Germany at the Battle of Ypres in 1915, chemical weapons caused choking, blindness, and excruciating deaths. Soon, both sides adopted gas masks as a grim necessity. Meanwhile, new technologies transformed the battlefield. Machine guns could cut down advancing troops in seconds. Artillery bombardments destroyed entire towns. Tanks, first introduced by the British in 1916, were intended to break the stalemate. Airplanes, once used for reconnaissance, became weapons in their own right, engaging in dogfights and dropping bombs. The battles were relentless. Verdun, fought in 1916, became a symbol of French resistance, where over 700,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing. The Battle of the Somme, launched the same year, saw British and French forces attempt to break through German lines. On the first day alone, Britain suffered nearly 60,000 casualties, the heaviest in its history. Yet after months of fighting, the front lines barely moved. On the Eastern Front, Battles were larger but more fluid. Russia's vast armies struggled against Germany's superior organization and technology. Early Russian advances collapsed, and defeats like the Battle of Tannenberg in 1914 devastated Russian morale. By 1917, food shortages, economic collapse, and war weariness sparked revolution. The Tsar abdicated, and later that year, the Bolsheviks seized power, promising peace, land, and bread. In March 1918, Russia signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, withdrawing from the war. At sea, Germany turned to unrestricted submarine warfare to starve Britain of supplies. Merchant ships and passenger liners were targeted without warning. The sinking of the Lusitania in May 1915, killing nearly 1,200 people, including Americans, drew outrage. Though the United States remained neutral for 2 more years, tensions grew steadily. Then in 1917, Germany gambled. It resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, knowing it might provoke America, but hoping to choke Britain first. At the same time, the British intercepted the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany urged Mexico to join the war against the U.S. In April 1917, America entered the war on the side of the Allies. The arrival of American troops and resources tipped the balance. For the first time in years, the Allies had both fresh manpower and the promise of endless supplies. Germany, already exhausted and blockaded, now faced an enemy with seemingly limitless strength. By 1918, the war was entering its final, decisive phase. With Russia out of the war, Germany shifted hundreds of thousands of troops to the Western Front. In the spring of 1918, it launched the Ludendorff Offensive, a massive push to break through before American forces could fully arrive. German troops advanced rapidly, capturing ground that had been static for years. For a moment, victory seemed within reach, but the cost was immense. German forces were stretched thin, their supplies dwindling, and their soldiers exhausted. When the Allies counterattacked in the summer, supported by fresh American divisions, the tide turned. The 100 Days Offensive pushed the Germans back relentlessly. For the first time since 1914, the Allies broke through German lines and forced a retreat. On the home front, Germany was collapsing. Food shortages caused unrest, strikes, and protests. The Navy mutinied, and revolution spread. By November 1918, the Kaiser abdicated, and a new German government sought peace. On November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., the armistice came into effect. Across Europe, church bells rang and crowds celebrated. After 4 years of slaughter, the guns finally fell silent, but peace brought its own challenges. In 1919, representatives of the victorious Allies met at Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh terms on Germany: territorial losses, military restrictions, and heavy reparations. Germany was forced to accept war guilt, a clause that placed full responsibility for the war on its shoulders. For many Germans, the treaty was a humiliation, a betrayal, and a burden that crippled their economy. The resentment it created would become fertile ground for extremism in the years to come. Elsewhere, empires collapsed. Austria-Hungary disintegrated into new states. The Ottoman Empire fell apart, its lands carved into mandates and new nations. The Russian Empire had already been replaced by Bolshevik rule. The old order of Europe was gone, replaced by uncertainty. The war's toll was staggering. Around 16 million people had died, and 20 million were wounded. Entire towns and villages were destroyed. Millions of veterans returned home with physical and psychological scars. A new phrase entered the lexicon: shell shock, describing the unseen wounds of war. And yet, amidst the devastation, efforts were made to honor the fallen. In Britain and across the Commonwealth, the poppy became a symbol of remembrance. Cemeteries and memorials were built, rows of white crosses standing in silent tribute. The First World War was called the War to End All Wars. But just 2 decades later, another global conflict would erupt, fueled in part by the unresolved bitterness of Versailles. Still, World War I remains a turning point in history, a moment when the old world gave way to the modern age. It reshaped borders, accelerated technology, and forced humanity to confront the terrible cost of industrialized warfare. World War I was more than a conflict of nations. It was a turning point in human history. It destroyed empires, redrew borders, and left scars that would shape the 20th century. Its lessons about war, power, and humanity remain with us, reminding the world of the price of peace and the cost of conflict.